Hello, welcome to the weekly Forex Outlook here at xm.com. I'm Rafi Boyajan, and with me is our chief economist, Michalis Soreniadis. So Michalis, we saw the US dollar outperforming this week. We had some very good data out of the US. We also had positive GDP numbers out of China as well, which boosted overall risk sentiment. And yet we saw many other major pairs, in particular the euro and the pound, lag the US peer. And we also saw some positive earnings results, which boosted equities across the globe. So what can you tell us in more detail what were the main drivers?
Well, as you said at the beginning of the week, I think because there was some positive risk sentiment, the dollar is seen as a bit of a safe haven, not as much as the yen and the Swiss franc. The Swiss franc was down significantly, by the way, during the week that was, but because the US is relatively insulated from the rest of the global economy, this makes the dollar serve a little bit as a safe haven. I think the dollar's attractiveness went up, especially after the strong retail sales numbers that were released in the United States. So this helped overall positive risk environment and a lot of optimism about China. On the one hand, we had the Chinese economic data such as GDP, industrial production, that showed that and retail sales that showed that the Chinese economy is doing well. And on the other hand, we have this persistent talk that a deal between China and the US is going to be announced shortly. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we had somewhat weaker than expected, at least, PMIs for the Eurozone. However, I think because we are in the Easter break for a lot of Western countries, the market's reaction was a little muted. Okay, the dollar did go up on this discrepancy, but overall, I think the market moves were relatively contained. As one may argue has been the case in the last few weeks, we haven't had so much volatility. The pound, with the British Parliament being in recess because of Easter, did not move much, although we did have some good data out of the UK. So I think the Aussie was a beneficiary, as we said, because of the strong Chinese numbers. We also had good employment data out of Australia. Perhaps speculation of a rate cut was what constrained the Aussie from rallying even further. So I think this is more or less the environment, Rafi, that we find ourselves going into this Easter, and what do we have to look forward to next week when a lot of markets reopen from this holiday?
Well, a lot of markets will reopen, but it's going to be a shortened week particularly in Europe. So it's going to be overall fairly quiet. The Australian dollar will remain in focus. We've got the Australian quarterly inflation numbers coming up next week. So the RBA has said that if inflation remains low and unemployment goes up, then that would warrant a rate cut. So if we do see weak inflation numbers next week, even despite the positive GDP numbers from China, we could nevertheless see the Aussie slip on speculation of a rate cut. We're going to have a couple of major central bank policy meetings, the Bank of Canada and the Bank of Japan. The Bank of Canada is expected to remain cautious, but they're unlikely to drop their tightening bias because we are seeing an uptick in inflationary pressures in Canada, and also we did see a bit of a bounce back in retail sales in Canada as well. So it's unlikely Stephen Powell will suggest that they're not planning on raising interest rates in the near future. Bank of Japan, on the other hand, could turn a bit more dovish. We are seeing weakening economic picture in Japan. Exports continue to decline, although the Bank of Japan does have limited arsenal in its hands. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the bank policymakers will signal any additional easing measures just yet. They would likely prefer to wait until things get much worse before acting again. The other highlight will be US GDP numbers for the first quarter, the advanced GDP report. So given the retail sales number that you mentioned out of the US, we could likely to see GDP coming in slightly above expectations. That could boost the US dollar further. But on the other hand, the euro will probably continue to struggle. We're not seeing any major data coming up next week, so euro traders will struggle to find any direction for the single currency.
And at the same time, I think two things that we haven't mentioned is that earnings season is continuing in the United States, and overall earnings have not been bad. I think they are within expectations and even better than expectations. And I think the market has also interpreted positively the release of the Mueller report in the US. I think at least in the short term, it's not increasing political uncertainty there. So that's another positive maybe for the US dollar and for the US economy and market. So thank you very much, Rafi, for your input. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.